Hello, good morning. My name is Milagros and I work at the Department of Applied Linguistics in the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. The title of this presentation is Academic Writing: Some Basic Features. This presentation is for students and researchers who, at some point or another, have to produce a piece of academic writing. The main aim of this presentation, as you can see on the screen, is to provide students with some basic recommendations in order to help them maintain a scholarly and objective tone in their academic writing. Well, first we are going to define what academic writing is. As you can see on the screen, academic writing is writing done by scholars for other scholars. This means that if you are doing a university degree, that includes you. So, basically, you will be engaged in activities that require you to read, to think, to argue, and to write in certain ways. In the next slide, you can see different situations where you can be producing some kind of academic writing. For example, when you attend lectures and when you perform classroom tasks. Also, when, for example, you visit your teacher for tutorials or seminar discussions. Other research genres within academic writing are journal articles, conference papers, and grant proposals. And you are also participating in some type of academic writing when you write essays, exam papers, graduate theses, projects, or when you go abroad to another university and you have to fill in course documents or doctoral oral defenses. Right, why do we need academic writing? Well, academic writing manifests through what is called a genre. First, we need to define what a genre is. Here on the screen you have a definition. A genre is a class of communicative events, the members of which share some set of communicative purposes. Let's say that a genre is one type of communicative event, one type of text, for example. The important thing to remember is that different genres have different purposes, and this is going to be reflected in the content, style, and intended audience. Also, this is going to be reflected on the vocabulary, the grammar, and discourse structures that you are going to employ. Just to give you an example, let's consider the following extract. Here we have one type of genre, the fairy tale. This is not an academic genre, but a literary one. So, of course, the first thing is that this genre has a specific purpose, which is to entertain. At the same time, it's got a specific audience, children. So this is going to be reflected in the type of language employed. For example, we have once upon a time, which is an opening phrase and indicates that this genre is a fairy tale. You can also have direct speech in the form of inverted commas. For example, go my dear and see how your grandmother is doing, for I hear she has been very ill. Right, in the next slide, we have a different genre, the research abstract. Well, a research abstract is like a summary that normally accompanies a research piece in a journal. So obviously the purpose is to inform, to report on the research you have carried out. And obviously the audience is a group of researchers or a scientific community. So again, this is going to be reflected in the type of language that you are going to employ. Right, now we have what I call an added problem, which is sometimes, especially if you are attending my courses, you will have to write in a second language. And sometimes you will have to write in a genre, remember, in a type, you will have to write a type of text which belongs to a different culture. In these situations, you have another problem because you need to, first, you need to know the language. in this case English. You also need to know the cultural conventions of the language. And finally, you need to know the rhetorical structure of the genre. This means the different parts and the purpose for each part. Right, so in the remaining of this presentation, we are going to focus attention on basic features of academic writing. Since we don't have time to explain all these features, we are just going to have a look at the audience, the purpose, and the style of your writing. Right, very quickly, the audience is a very important variable. Even before you write, you need to know who your audience is. And you also need to know how much your audience knows about the topic you are going to write about. So imagine that you are a postgraduate student. Your audience will normally be an instructor. This instructor will have expectations from you. Right? So if you want to be successful when you write a piece of academic writing, you need to know and define very clearly who your audience is. Audience is clearly interrelated to the purpose. For example, if your audience knows less than you about the topic you are going to write about, the purpose would be instructional. But if your audience is your instructor, in this case, the aim would be just to display knowledge, to show that you know. So once you define the audience and the purpose, then we move on to the next variable, the strategy. Right, now we are going to have a look at style. It's very important that you make sure that your communication is written in the appropriate style. So this means that the style should be consistent with the message and the audience. But what is an appropriate style, especially in academic writing? Well, normally a style is going to be reflected in the language choices you make. So we are going to have a look at two very important aspects. The so-called vocabulary shift, which is related to degrees of formality, when you have to use verbs, nouns, and other parts of speech. And we are also going to have a look at the way you use negative forms in academic writing. Right, you have to remember that one important feature of academic writing style is choosing the more formal alternative when selecting a verb, a noun, or other part of a speech. So remember, the style in academic writing has to be quite formal. Let's have a look at what happens with verbs. English has different possibilities of expressing an action. Basically, you can use a phrasal verb, which is a verb plus a particle, or you can use a prepositional verb, or finally you can use a single verb of Latin origin. Right, in academic writing, the preference is for a single verb of Latin origin. This is the more formal alternative of all. Let's have a look at an example. Here we have the beginning of a research paper taken from this journal, Biotechnology for Biofuels. So you have two possibilities. You can begin explaining the purpose with a phrasal verb. The purpose of this research was to look into watermelon use, etc., etc. Or you can choose the single verb of Latin origin. Notice that sometimes, most of the times, these verbs are very similar to the Spanish verbs. The purpose of this research was to investigate watermelon use. Right. Now we're going to have a look at other parts of a speech. Again, you need to remember that in writing you should use a more formal form if one exists. So here we have an example, and in the first one we have used a more informal expression. The competition faced by US growers from imports of Mexican fresh vegetables has gotten more intense. This structure is made up of get plus an adjective, and it's a very common structure in English. You get tired, you get thirsty, etc. However, this is quite informal, so you need to paraphrase this sentence with a more formal alternative, which is the next one. The competition faced by US growers has intensified. Right, so remember that in all cases what you need to do is choose the most formal alternative. Right, now we're going to have a very quick look at negative forms and how you use them in academic writing. In English, it's normal to make negative forms with the help of the auxiliary verb and not, as you can see in the examples here. However, what happens in academic writing? Well, in academic writing, it's very common to avoid negative forms that involve the auxiliary verb plus not, and instead you use other negative forms with no, little and few. So when you find any of these structures, not any, you replace them by no, not much, you replace them by little, and not many, you replace them by few. Let's have a look at just some examples. The analysis didn't yield any results, so it's a more formal option to say the analysis yielded no new results. There is not much evidence. It's more common to find in academic writing. There is little evidence. And in the last one, without fuel cell acceleration, there are not many affordable options. It would be more natural to say there are few affordable options, and that avoid the negative forms. So remember that if you want your style to be formal, you can use these two strategies, right? Verb, noun and other parts of speech shift and negative forms. And this is all. Thank you very much for your attention.